The humans had nearly 1,000 stars within their medium-sized realm, with 150 habitable planets and another dozen mid-terraform. All the rest had at least a mining station, research facility, or military garrison, with several hundred sporting fully domed colonies. Much of their industry had been automated as well, resulting in a large population with the freedom to pursue their passions. Some enjoyed academia, career scholars who could be called upon by their governments to research problems. Some enjoyed quiet rural lives, tending gardens and developing new agricultural products so the farm AIs could feed the hundreds of billions of humans. Others became adamant gamers, using various programs to develop VR worlds for others to explore. The Human Confederation worked well, while the overall parliament had clear lines delineating the limits of its authority. The solar cantons and their subordinate colonies were largely left to handle internal matters locally. Friendly competition between cantons resulted in many technological innovations, and some cantons decided to specialize in certain fields in order to ensure their name remained renowned. Overall, humanity saw itself in a golden age, one that continued to gild itself further with exploration, peaceful expansion, diplomacy, and prosperity. But no golden age could last forever. The Hurox Empire saw itself also in a golden age, but their expansions were rarely into unclaimed space. They saw the world through the theory of conservation. Matter cannot be created nor destroyed. They corrupted this to be their guiding principle. Resources are finite, and others possessing them means less for the Hurox to use. The first Huroxian law. They focused their attacks first on humanity's outer colonies, those with the weakest defenses but many untapped resources. The Hurox didn't need them now, just to deny humanity the possession of them. They continued to ravage through the lightly populated outer worlds. The Gallic and Hispanic colonies were in the direct path, but the Cynic and Nipponic colonies were just at risk around the periphery. The Hurox pushed humanity back to the core Canton worlds. They had been a power on the rise, but they had fallen from their golden age. It was a long way down. Human science proved to be far more adaptable than the Hurox expected. While they didn't often win in direct fights, ambush tactics had taken down several vessels, and the humans had no qualms about stealing the technologies they had acquired. As the war continued, humanity had fielded better and better ships. Hurox High Command had even considered pausing the expansion to consolidate their gains and work on how to fortify their new territory. It wouldn't be without precedent, but it had been quite a long time since a species made them do so. Fleet Master Jilk was opposed to the idea. He saw how quickly the humans had adapted their industry. Failing to push the current initiative and technological advantage would give the humans a chance to rally, and that could be dangerous. They might even... An explosion broke his train of thought. Not necessarily an explosion, though. It was as if the entire vessel had been struck by a heavy object. His command hologram sprang to life, showing the location of the damage. He turned to the rear of his command center, looking at the two meteor-wide brains suspended in synthetic spinal fluid. Hobier, his ship's thinking center, was already working. Admiral, impact at level 7. Hull was breached but has been sealed by the striking object. Working on getting an image. Shipmaster Gorn has already dispatched engineers. One other ship reports similar impact. Carrier class, Blackwing. Reports indicate engineers are en route as well. 16 ships report no impacts. Jiln nodded. The two ships' captains knew their business well, and Jiln can focus on commanding the fleet itself. Hobier, develop report requirements. Combat capability of impacted ships. Then combat capability of entire fleet. Then source of objects, if any. Yes, Admiral. 3 requirements developed and transmitted to captains. Initial report of impacts and developed requirements transmitted to nearest garrison. Something didn't feel right. like how one feels when one walks through the territory of a pack of Keth. You just feel the unease of something. Why were there a pair of asteroids just loose in the barren system the fleet had been traveling through? And how did both holes near perfectly seal themselves? Explosions could be heard throughout the ship, not with the level of power the impact had. These were small ones, echoing throughout the halls. He watched on his hologram as bulkheads were sealed, likely the captain trying to contain the damage. Except the bulkheads failed to contain the damage. One by one, small detonations created holes in them, expanding aft until the sequential breaches split into two directions, one towards the engine room and the other towards Jiln's command suite. These weren't secondary explosions. They were breaching charges. These were boarders. He sped towards his communications console to summon his security detail and warn the carrier. Humans were on board. He barely dialed the fleet-wide frequency when the wall exploded. The concussive force was incredible, but the human Marines that poured through the hole in the wall didn't seem to notice. One of them whirled his rifle around, slamming the butt into Jiln's spinal nerve cluster, triggering all his neurons to fire. After that lightning, he began to drift into the inky blackness of unconsciousness. It was a long way down. Corporal Sean O'Loughlin floated awkwardly at attention. His parents had been born in the Saffron Colony's domed city, but they had been evacuated back to the A-Rock Canton, days before the Herox destroyed the magnificent structure. His mother still struggled with losing her home, but thankfully, nearly all the civilians had made it out. Unfortunately, her youngest brother, barely 20 at the time, had volunteered to be part of the shielding force, and his loss had never really healed. She did, however, meet Sean's father on the evacuation ship, and now 22 years later, Sean wore the Canton's clover crest on his uniform's shoulder, just as his uncle had. He had seen how much others had lost because of the Herox, and he had a few younger siblings to carry on if something happened to him. So he decided to join the vanguard, the Meteors, the Drop Troopers. This was the first assault against a world that the Herox had held from before the war. A Herox core world at that, thousands of light years behind the front line. This held one of the major shipyards, as well as an important command center. Luckily, some HVI the Marines had captured a few months back had seen reason and talked. The officer had given HCHQ nearly everything: access to the command nets, internal politics of the nobility, and intelligence on critical military infrastructure. Taking this planet would at least delay the onslaught that humanity faced. It was also very likely the only mission any of these troopers would participate in, given how unlikely reinforcements were. This was a surgical strike, but also a one-way trip. They were to cause as much chaos as they could, but were given a prioritized list of targets if they could reach them. Corporal O'Loughlin floated down the line of his three subordinates. One wore a red maple leaf of his home, Dominion, while the other two bore the stylized cherry blossom of the Nipponic colony of Sakura. He checked their equipment, and one by one he strapped them into their egg-shaped pods, seat facing down relative to the layout of the ship, ensuring all the systems were working. He verified the inventory of 5 combat drones and 2 recon drones each, and ensured their AI assistants were up. When he was done, his own sergeant checked them, then strapped Sean in. Finally, with all the doors closed and the countdown began. 2 minutes until launch. He prepared for his eyeballs to feel like they were about to meet his brain. 1 minute. He tried to crack his neck, but the recessed cushion cutout of his body prevented any movement. It was probably for the better. 30 seconds. He took a breath, and then another. As much as he enjoyed the practice drops, he was about to be in the heart of Herox territory. He felt the ship slam out of hyperspace. Not a second later, the countdown timer hit 0. He felt the moment the magnetic rails engaged, and then his pod was blasting towards this new world. It was a long way down. Scores of human dreadnoughts sat in the black outside the Herox homeworld system. They sat with their lines of fire overlapping, making a near sphere of death that hung in the black nearly 7 light hours from the sun. This was supposed to be a safe distance. Even now, defiance and bile and hate spewed from the capital planet. Many Herox had been willing to bow to human strength. In a culture where might makes right, the loser bows to the victor. But not all saw that reason, particularly the ruling caste, those who had the most to lose and those that bore the most responsibility. After the absolute purge of all humans that had been captured, humanity knew that not all sentients were redeemable. It was a graveyard still in the command center of the HCV Enola. The vessel had only been built with one purpose: to deliver the specialized munition in its hold. It held a minimal crew, half a dozen engineers and a pair of emergency firefighters, one medical officer, no corpsman, a single missileer, and an old admiral who had been ready to retire from service before the war had ever started over 2 decades prior. When the mission was over, the crew was to abandon the vessel as the autopilot flew it into a star. There was no glory to be had on this mission, but it would bring peace to humanity. It was perhaps the only path to peace not drowned in human blood, but they had made the decision to trade Herox blood and more for it. The missileer prepared the munition, removed all the safeties, and inserted his key into his lock of the twinned pair. The admiral drew the other from a chain around his neck and inserted it into the remaining lock, nodding to the lieutenant commander to his right. They both turned their keys simultaneously, opening the aluminum glass covering to a fingerprint scanner and a recessed button. He nodded and pulled a communicator to his mouth. "All hand, prepare for missile launch." His voice matched his heart, heavily laden with sadness and regret, but also resolve. His thumb pushed into the button, sliding it barely a centimeter into the device. It was a long way down. The Heroxian Emperor remained surrounded by his sycophants and true believers. Even now, down to their last system, they showered him with words of praise and assurances that they would still defeat the humans. But in their twilight sky, they watched a single missile streak like a meteor, like a human drop pod, like a boarding craft. Despite the time and distance and trajectory, it was clearly visible, flying so fast. Flying past Hera, past Hera's 2 moon, and towards the star at the center of the system. Then they watched as the sun gave way to darkness. They felt the tremors throughout the planet and saw their 2 moons being ripped apart. The tidal forces shook skyscrapers until they collapsed. The screams of lickspittles and zealots just a whisper to the cacophony of quakes and the rending of glass and steel. They watched as the stars moved in ways they had never moved before, at speeds they had never moved before. They felt their bodies being pulled, stretched, as they were dragged towards where the star once was. The humans had fired a void bomb, a singularity missile, a warhead that could collapse a star into a black hole. Hera, and the last of the warmongers left of the Heroxian species, fell into the chasm left in the wake of that missile. It was a long way down. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 44, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.